So that kind of explains our ministry there in the Ivory Coast of West Africa. The pastors need about $100 a month. Will help free them up to grow their churches. A lot of the pastors spend all week long farming, working in the field, trying to feed their families. Some of them had crops that didn't make, so they were really malnourished and hungry, just struggling. And so $100 a month covers the pastor. But then we looked at how can we help these churches become self-sufficient, because we don't want to support them for the rest of their life. We want to help their church become self-sufficient. And so that's really our goal when we go to a country, is to find out how to help them, but also figure out how to help them become self-sufficient. And so their biggest need was buildings. And so currently they build these mud huts, and they squat on people's land, which is legal for like a year. And then they have to tear it down and move somewhere else. And so no one really had the funds to build the church building, and so they're constantly kind of just floating around, losing congregation, getting some more, losing some, getting some more. And so they also aren't seen as a viable, legit church because they don't have a building. And so we started looking at how to help them with a building. That's not what our ministry really does. We're not interested in building churches. Other ministries build buildings. But in the Ivory Coast, that was how we were going to help the pastors. So we found out land's cheap. It's about $100, $200 a parcel. And so a church would only need 1 to 2, depending on the size the church needs to be for the community. And then they all build out there with cement and mud. And so they make bricks, they let them dry. And that's how they build. So then they need metal roofs, concrete floors, doors, windows, and a concrete fence or block fence around the property to secure it. And so all that comes to about around $6,000. So that's where we came up with the 3 years. And then the pastors there said, well, you can't just build them for them. They need to be investing in it themselves too. It needs to be theirs. And so they're going to build the bricks, but they're also matching a 3 to 1 or a 4 to 1, depending on the church, contribution. And so the amount we set up to raise for them, it shows that they're going to match it 25 or 33%. And so the church is going to give sacrificially to give so that they can build this church with matching funds from churches that want to partner with them. And so that is kind of a 3-year project. And so within 3 years, we feel like the pastor will be in a better spot financially. The church will be established. And the best thing is the people will have given for 3 years sacrificially, which is something that's been hard to teach in West Africa because they are so poor, they don't have much. They haven't been faithful in giving, which has hurt their pastors becoming self-sufficient and having to spend so much time in the field. But they really feel like 3 years of giving for their church building, which they desperately want. The people have agreed to give. They want to see their church established, have a building. We'll teach them to give. And that after 3 years of them sacrificially giving, people that learn to give don't generally stop giving after they see God blessing them, especially when they're giving sacrificially. And so not only will they have a physical church, not only will they be done with that building project, but then the pastors can take that church can take what they've been giving for the building, transition it to taking care of their pastor, continue to give, and then they'll be self-sufficient with the building. And so that's the goal in the Ivory Coast. I think right now there's a dozen pastors in their Bible Institute out there, and new villages being reached all the time. And so the idea is a 3-year commitment and get the church going and move on to another one. So a really unique project. Love the project. Missionaries been out there almost 30 years, done a great job setting up the infrastructure. And they're in their mid-70s now, I believe. And so only go out there a few times a year for a little bit due to their health. He had a heart attack and a stroke last year. And so just able to partner with them to help their ministry flourish even after they're done out there and they're called home. Their ministry will be able to keep going if we can get behind and partner with these pastors and keep reaching villages in West Africa. So that's really what the Ivory Coast is about. That's how we're able to help there. Every country is different. And so I just wanted to kind of give you I spoke this morning broadly about what the ministry does, but I felt like this would give you kind of a specific idea about what our ministry does. And so I'll go ahead and open up to questions, see if anyone has any questions. In the back here.
So, okay,
Yeah.
my question is that okay? You're talking about helping the pastors there. How do they become pastors? I mean, meaning like, do you just like find them, or is that something that has already been established?
Sure. That's a good question. So I'm going to answer that kind of in a long way. But how do we find the pastors? Well, the pastors are there. In order to work with CORE, they have to be already pastoring. We're not a for-hire ministry. Um, we're looking for pastors that are struggling, that are already obeying God. Um, for one reason, we want to see them obeying God and doing what they're supposed to do without help. But then also, in other countries in America, it's not really this way, but in other countries, being a pastor is a prestigious position. So it demands respect in the community. And so people will sign up to be a pastor. Whether they're saved or not, whatever they believe or don't believe, they'll sign up to be a pastor because it's immediate respect. People in the community have to show them respect. And so that's part of the reason for that policy. But how we find them, it always starts with a referral. So I'll use the Ivory Coast, for example. There's a pastor 5 minutes down the road from our sending church, and he's actually why we're in Egypt. But he was telling me about this missionary in the Ivory Coast that was doing a great job, and then this missionary in the Ivory Coast reached out to me and said, hey, this pastor recommended I reach out to you. And so that's how it starts. It starts with referrals. That way we're not wasting our time with people that aren't doctrinally like-minded. We're not going out to visit them and finding out, oh, our philosophy's different, our doctrines are different. We just spent thousands of dollars to go out and see you, only to find out that it's not worth it, and that we can't partner with you. Now, the sad thing is that still happens from time to time, but by starting with a reference from someone that we already know, pastor, a missionary, someone, that really helps us weed out and get to the guys that are like-minded, that are needing the help and have the structure to help us, because we have to have accountability. We have to have certain things within our ministry in order for it to even work. And so these pastors are pastors that have, like in the Ivory Coast, they've already graduated from Bible Institute and are already actively pastoring. They're just they're struggling and in need.
So these pastors have already like gone to school or whatever.
Yes.
And then they go back home. Is that what it is?
Yeah, so I'm just going to keep going with the Ivory Coast. So these pastors out in the Ivory Coast, they go to the Bible Institute that a missionary established there, and it's actually led by one of the nationals who speaks English. He's well educated, and so he trains the other pastors, and they do that every other month for 1 week. It's a modular because they can't leave their families for that long, and so they'll travel, some of them 5-6 hours each way, to meet up for 1 week of intensive classes and do a modular, and then they'll go back home. And so that's how they get their training. They have to graduate from there before they can be a pastor. A lot of them will serve alongside another pastor for a while. There's lots of ways they get their training.
So is that do you go to the institute, and that's how you found out?
No, so we found
pastors?
about them through the missionary contact that reached out to me, through our main contact.
So basically, it's word of mouth.
Yeah,
Okay.
word of mouth. And we require that word of mouth, that referral, that reference, just because it helps us weed out. We have people contact us every week that want us to support them. But we don't necessarily know what they believe, or they could look on our website and figured out what we believe and claim to believe that too. Believe it or not, there's a lot of corruption, not just in America, but in other countries. So we have to be very careful about our processes and policies to help make sure that accountability is what it should be.
That was going to be my question, because I do know my husband and I support a national minister down in Kenya.
Okay.
And you know how bad it can be without serious accountability.
Sure.
And that's what, I guess you answered my question about the accountability, the way you guys.
Yeah, so that's part of it. We got to have a main contact there. And so like in the Ivory Coast, I'll just keep going down this road. It's our missionary, but then he's established a national pastor that runs the orphanage. He pastors the church, and he's kind of his main contact. He teaches in the Bible Institute, and the missionaries raised him since he was a boy. And so they have a very close relationship. He's our main contact there. And so we got to have a main contact. They have to fill out accountability reports each month. And so we send the money each month to the missionary. He sends it to, in the Ivory Coast, that main contact, that national pastor, and then he distributes it each month to the pastors directly. And then the pastors send us an accountability report each month. So we have a financial circle of accountability, so we can show that the funds that were sent got to the right pastor. It allows them to write down some prayer requests, and then also an update on their ministry. So that's coming in once a month to help build relationship, help build accountability, and know what's going on. So those reports help us. The main contact is crucial. Having someone there, that has helped us several different times. We had one last year in the Philippines where our main contact reached out to me and said, hey, I think something's up with this one pastor. And I said, what do you mean something's up? And he said, well, he just seemed different. Something seems different. And I said, well, can you go check on it for us? And he said, yeah. So about 2 weeks later, he had to drive 4 or 5 hours each way to go check on this pastor. So he took a day off, went to go check on him. Well, he got out to his church, and the property was overgrown. No one was there. Started walking in the community, talking to people, trying to figure out where the pastor was. And it turns out the month before, he'd left and gone to another island, to a bigger city. And so he didn't tell us. He was still sending in his report. But our main contact said, hey, something's different with his communication, how he acted. He might have wanted funds differently, but he was able to tell right away something's different with this pastor. And so that's crucial. And so there's several different levels that we have to have in our process to even work with a group of pastors to have that accountability and structure.
Do the pastors have to pay for their training, or is it like a discipleship kind of program where they're just like kind of taken under the wing and taught these things and then let back out in the community?
So in the Ivory Coast, the missionary covers the cost of the training. He provides the material. And so they have to get there and get home. But, yeah, it's free for them to go to. Oftentimes, though, they have to, before they're in the institute, they have to start kind of being an assistant pastor and just kind of being with the pastor a lot for discipleship and just different things.
All right, so I got two things. First, so like if our church was to take on a national pastor or a few national pastors, do we get communication from that to find out how that ministry is doing?
Sure.
And then the second thing, several weren't in here when you were talking about the mosquito people. So if you'll tell us about that again too, that'd be great.
So if you, our partners can have as much influence and information as they want. Some churches just want to write a check and that's it. Some churches want to be involved, and so we can help you go see them. You can have their contact info. You'll get the reports each month. You can be as involved as you want. One pastor views it as that's their church planner, and they support him fully, and so they're the only people praying for him, and they're his basically church. And so they send him, it's a guy in India, and it's $250 a month for him. And so they send him his $250 every month through us. But he has communication. And so if you want that communication, you can have it. There are some things we ask, like if they start asking for money directly, just some different things to let us know. But you can be as involved as you want to be. You can go out there and see them, have a VBS with them, do evangelism, whatever you want to do. We will help you facilitate that as much as we can. The mosquito people are in Honduras. That's a region where we were given a property, 72 acres. It's got a house, dormitories. They used to have a medical clinic out there, pastor's training, and Bible Institute. And so it's been vacant for 12 years. And so we were just given that property last year, so we're getting it back to operation. But we're calling it base camp so that we can go and base out of it, because we can reach, there's 100,000 people in that area, and we can get to most of the villages within 2 hours, either boat through the rivers or by truck, four-wheel drive truck getting through the dirt roads. And so we'll be able to help minister to them and help them with their churches. There's a lot of churches out there that the missionary helped reach. There's a lot of pastors still pastoring that were trained by that missionary, but it's been 12 years since anyone's been out there, and so they haven't had really any encouragement for their training. They're lacking Bibles. They're lacking just all these things. And so it's a way for us to be a help and a blessing out there. Did that cover what you wanted me to say about it?
Yeah.
Okay. So, any other questions? So the missionaries left and went to Africa. They felt like their time there was done. So they turned it over to the mission board, and they did a few camps for a year or two out there, and then kind of forgot about it, I guess. Actually, when we found out about it, another missionary had been given a 100-year lease on the property and had done nothing with it, and had no vision for it. And so every time we'd go out there, he'd mention it to us. And so we finally asked, like, could you give it to us, because we have some vision for it.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, if you can get the mission board to agree to that, I'll sign off my lease and you can have it.
Wow.
And so we called the mission board, and they were like, what property? We don't know we have property out there. And so there'd been enough turnover in the president, vice president of that mission board in this time frame that no one knew about it except one or two of the board members that had been around. And so finally we went and presented our vision for it. And they said, well, great, how much you want to pay for it? And we said, well, we would rather you just give it to us. And so they gave it to us.
Wow.
So
For your wife, we'll let her answer. 'Cause
Okay.
sometimes we let the man do all the talking, and I think
I'll
it's good
gladly
to hear
let her
from
talk.
Yeah. So Lauren, tell us about like your role in the ministry, and then tell us how like maybe the countries that have had the biggest impact on you, what it's like traveling as a missionary's wife, and doing all those things.
Okay, I'm going to start with which ones had the most impact on me. When I was younger, a teenager, I surrendered to full-time service, whatever the Lord wanted me to do. But I had it in my mind that I was going to be a missionary in Africa. I don't know why, but I always had a heart for Africa. And so when Tim and I got married, we asked the Lord, where are we going? And he said, I want you to just stay here. And so we had a business. And every year at missions conference, Lord, where are we going? And he'd say, I want you to stay here. And so when we took our first missions trip with CORE and got connected with them and national pastors and really had a heart to help any way that we could, but God had not called us to sell everything and go work for CORE yet. And so we started praying, Lord, how can we help? And not too much longer, Brother TJ had just kind of put it out there that he needed some help, some coordinators to help in the accountability process. And so we said, we'll help you. What do you need? And he said, well, I need an African coordinator and I need an Asian coordinator. And so my first role with CORE was working with all of the African national pastors and being in contact with them and receiving their reports and praying for them. And it was just such a sweet confirmation. And so we've been able to travel quite a bit the last few years with CORE, but my favorite place has been the Ivory Coast and has been Africa because that's always on my heart. In fact, I told Tim, I said, if you die, I'm coming right back here. And he says not until he dies because it's a hard place. My role within CORE, I am over all of our coordinators who contact the pastors and kind of take care of them. And then I also take care of all of the finances. Did you ask something else? Is that all?
Just what it's like to be a missionary's wife.
Oh, we love it. We really love it. So we've always been more compliant people as far as like rules and things growing up. Like my brothers were the rebels. It wasn't me. I was always very compliant. And so my parents didn't tell me no that often just because I honestly, like I was a good kid. And so, but as an adult, the Lord has told us no several times on things. For instance, where are we going? And he would say, no, I want you to stay here. And so we just, he's taught us a lot of lessons through that, but he's kind of brought us to Ephesians 3:20 that says he's able to do exceedingly abundantly above all we could ask or think. And so there were a few things that he said no to that I just had a really hard time getting over. And he said, all right, what is your dream? And I said, this is a list. If I could have anything in life, this is what I would want. And he said, well, my plan is better for you. Do you trust me? And so when I finally gave over and said, okay, I trust you, then he's just slowly been showing us and teaching us that his plan is better than anything we could have wanted. We get to travel the world, not even just in seeing really cool things, but God is doing great works all over the world. And he doesn't need us to do that work, but he allows us to be a part of it if we want to, and he allows us to see it. And so there's times sitting in the Ivory Coast, watching them worship when the Lord just whispers, my plan was better, wasn't it? Or we got to go to the Taj Mahal a couple years ago, and those times God's just like, see, isn't my plan better? And we really are. It's fun. It's fun. Life has its challenges no matter what you do. And but when you're doing what God wants you to, and it's like he really does just pour blessings on you. And it is a lot of fun. We do enjoy it.
We're going to not see that. Mark didn't hear that. Yeah, I didn't do it the right way. Mark didn't hear that. Is it on? Oh, it is. Okay. Okay, my question's kind of for both of you. You guys don't have any children, right? So where does that fit in, or does it at all, in your ministry?
So that's one of the things that the Lord said no to. And for many, many, many years, we did everything that we could, and the Lord just said no. And my goal was to raise missionaries or pastors' wives or whatever, turn them back to God. And that just wasn't his plan for us. And so it allows us to get up and travel the world and to do things that maybe we wouldn't be able to do together had we had a house full of children.